Hi, I'm Michael Leckie, and I'm here to talk to you today about digital transformation. In particular, we're going to cover what I call the 5 questions of digital transformation. And one of the things I want to start out by saying is that digital transformation can be looked at a lot of different ways, but I'm going to take the perspective that actually we're farther along on the digital than the human side of digital transformation. A friend of mine has said to me that we're in a world of 5th generation information technology systems and 2nd generation human systems. And I think this is part of the problem with digital transformation, with understanding it, defining it, and knowing what to do about it. So we're going to step back and we're going to start by looking at what digital transformation is. And then we'll walk through the 5 questions that you need to ask and keep asking in order to determine what digital transformation means to you and your organization and what you're going to do about it. So we're going to start this with a little bit of a pop quiz. And here's the pop quiz question. What can you find nearly 500 million of in about a half a second? Well, I'll tell you what you can find. You can find responses to typing in the phrase digital transformation in Google. By the way, when I started talking about this actually a couple of years ago, it was about 42 million. Now it's about 496 million items that pop up in about 0.55 seconds. So the one thing that I think that tells us is what digital transformation is, and the information out there about it has not gotten smaller, has not gotten more defined. It's gotten much larger. Now, it used to be when I Googled that, what I got was a number of links and also a box, kind of the little key box that pops up, the sponsor box on Google that has information in it that seems like, wow, this must be the real answer, which is what they want you to think, and click and go to that. And that's the whole Google money relationship with that organization. Well, this one went to a consulting firm, and I'm about to share that consulting firm's definition with you. Actually, though, when I was preparing for this, I looked to see, is it the same consulting firm out there still with the same information? And it's not. Now it goes to a definition by Salesforce. And what's interesting is it takes you into a document by Salesforce that is very, very long. It has a lot of details around what digital transformation is. That makes the point even better, that digital transformation is not something that's been precisely defined. But nonetheless, let's take a look at that first definition because there's some really interesting things in here. So if you pardon me taking my eyes off you for a second, I got to look at my screen as well, and I want to read this definition. Digital transformation is the profound transformation of business and organizational activities, processes, competencies, and models to fully leverage the changes and opportunities of a mix of digital technologies and their accelerating impact across society in a strategic and prioritized way with present and future. And that's where it stopped. There was a few points of ellipsis, and you had to actually click on the box and go to the consulting firm's website to see the rest of the definition. So let me give you the rest of that definition once you do that. Blah, 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 impact across society in a strategic and prioritized way with present and future shifts in mind. Now, what's interesting to me is that definition is fairly long. There's a lot of stuff in there. I can't say it's crisp and tells me almost immediately like, oh, well, now I know what digital transformation is. And what's most interesting to me is the 3 words that you had to click into their site to find are actually the 3 in that definition used differently than they intended that I think are the most interesting. Shifts in mind. Because I believe that for most of us, digital transformation is about a shift in mind. It's about the way we see the world and the opportunities there and how digital transformation and digital technologies allow us an opportunity to see those different things and to exploit them in our own businesses or work. And why I think shifts in mind is important is because most of our organizations weren't born digital. Now, you may be out there working for Apple or Google or Amazon or Facebook or Tencent or Alibaba or Baidu, any of the companies that are around that are large and well established, the big digital giants, or you may be working for a small tech firm that was born digital. But still, the vast majority of us are employed by non-digital firms or firms that were not born digital, so we're having to transform to digital. And that's a very different thing from starting out digital. Now, what's interesting is even the firms that were, let's say, born digital, like Microsoft, have had to go through a digital transformation themselves as what digital meant in their place in the digital marketplace and world has shifted and changed. So let's take a look at that. The first thing to know is that there is no blueprint. There is no clear path for digital transformation. There's a lot of organizations out there that will tell you this is how it's done, and we'll sell it to you and help you do it. but it is very different depending upon the organization that you're in. So we have to understand that digital transformation is a journey that we have to discover, not something that's defined for us, which for many of us, that may seem a bit daunting. Like, well, geez, if I don't know the path, how can I get there? But knowing that it's one of discovery might be a little more freeing and allow you to find out what digital can be to you specifically that matters more than it matters to others. Another thing about digital transformation that I think maybe that definition and a lot of definitions get wrong is that it's not a noun. We look at it like a digital transformation, our digital transformation, like it's a thing, like it has a fixed point in time. We can go up to it, we can start it, we can finish it and move on. I don't believe that's the case at all. Digital transformation is a verb. It's about the transforming, and it's about learning to be transformative and to transform over and over again. So what I'm going to give you in this talk is 5 questions that I think can be the engine of transformative behavior for your organization. It can be what transforming looks like. I use the metaphor of the rowers, and I believe that if you ask these questions like rowers, if you continue to ask them and you continue to ask them and continue to ask them, they will pull you forward into what digital transformation needs to be for you. So let's get right into the 5 questions. So here they are right now. What in the world does digital actually mean? Can your company handle digital transformation? What happens to the people who can't or won't go digital? Are your leaders doing what transformational leaders have to do? And are you personally ready, willing, and able to transform yourself? There they are right there in the screen. Now, you can stop now if you want to, but we can also keep going and dig a little bit deeper into each of these. Let's take a look at the first one. So, 1, what does digital actually mean? It's a very confusing question. Oftentimes in talking with clients, I'll use what I call the spectrum of digital and say that, look, along this spectrum, you have what's often called digitization, which is basically taking services, products, processes that you have and using technology to make them better. However you define better, faster, more efficient, more informed, but it's doing things you're already doing. Think of this like music. When we started listening to recorded music, it was on, big heavy discs of vinyl, and they got lighter and they got better, but we're listening to recorded music on that vinyl. Then we had cassette tapes. Then unfortunately we had 8-track tapes. Then we had CDs, and then we had streaming. And all of that is the same product, recorded music to listen to, but how it was delivered changed over time. And given those different delivery mechanisms, there were a lot of implications, obviously, for the business model. But it's still digitizing the same thing, recorded music, right? Then there's coming up with new streams of revenue, new business opportunities by connecting things that hadn't been heretofore connected using technology that's now available, either the computing power that we have or the new technologies that we're inventing. And also that ends up many times redefining what's value. So if you think about taxi cabs and then look at companies like Uber and Lyft, taxis begin to utilize apps to do the same thing they were already doing, but use technology, just like digitizing. But Uber and Lyft decided, wait a minute, it's not about just digitizing how do I hail a cab. It's about connecting people. I have money to spend and need to get somewhere. I have a means of transportation, need a job. If I can connect these two things seamlessly, I've got a whole new revenue stream. And even that's evolving into autonomous vehicles and the delivery that they're doing now. There's so many things that have come out of that since they stepped aside from just being a cab company to being a company that transports people, things, and objects, right? So that's more of that, taking those digital business opportunities and exploiting them and creating something new. And then another one that we'll talk quite a bit about is when people talk about a digital organization or a digital mindset. Satya Nadella at Microsoft refers to Carol Dweck's work on mindset a lot, and they talk about how do we have to think to be in a digital world, which is about being more innovative, about being more agile, all those terms that we're hearing. Those are ways of working that unless we embrace, we can't be more digital. So let's start with those 3 things as a definition of what digital actually means. We can look at that and say, okay, that's really interesting. Now, what does it mean to me? And that's exactly the right question. Let's take a look at that. So we'll start with looking at the question. How do you define digital? I think the problem with that question is the emphasis. It's not how do you define digital, it's how do you define digital. Let me give an example. The financial services firm Fidelity, a firm that I personally use and have known for a long time. As they started looking at where digital was going, how it was changing their marketplace, they realized that they were putting all of their products together in a way that worked for them. The different product groups would create their products, put them out there, and you as the consumer of those products, you had to figure out which ones you needed, maybe work with one of their advisors, but you kind of had to cobble together what you wanted. And they realized that other organizations were really focusing on you as the individual. They could get clearer on who you are. So what they did is they reorganized to look at basically three personas. Somebody who's really just starting out and getting going and investing and thinking about the future. People who are now maybe having children, thinking about college, wanting to put a little more aside. Their life is changing a bit. It's no longer beer money. Now it's going to be tuition money. And then people who had amassed some wealth but wanted to continue to manage that wealth and leave a legacy. They realized that these three personas were the key personas that were accessing their services in the digital world. And so they reorganized, and they reorganized around those three personas. And all the products and the services groups had to figure out how to come together and serve those three personas. So for them, digital meant we're not going to be our product based, we're going to be your persona based. Let's take a look at another one. So the picture you're looking at now is a picture of Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. But this example is actually not about Schiphol. It's about the company that provides the lighting in Schiphol, Philips. Philips, among other things, is a lighting company. And one of the things they've discovered is how lighting impacts people's moods and buying patterns. So what they've done is they've gone to Schiphol and said, look, we're not just going to sell you light bulbs or lighting fixtures for the airport. We're going to sell you illuminated space. And we will use the way we illuminate space to drive traffic and to drive sales in a way that's better for Schiphol Airport. And the savings or the revenue gains that come from that, we want to share in that. So for them, digital in this particular area is moving from selling just the bulbs and the fixtures to selling the concept of illuminated space and the benefit it brings. That's how they're currently, or have been recently, defining digital, at least in regard to lighting. So you don't necessarily need to be Fidelity or Philips, but what you do have to do is figure out, what does digital mean for you? How do you define digital? That is the first question of digital transformation. And that may change, but it'll be driven by strategy. And it's a question you need to be asking a lot of people, because there are a lot of different answers out there. And the one that rises to the top, or the ones that rise to the top, may not rise to the top by starting at the top. They may be noticed by somebody else at different parts of your organization. So an interesting thing to note about these questions, they're questions not just for the C-suite. They're questions for across the organization. That's number one. How do you define digital? Number two, can your company handle digital transformation? And I'm going to touch on three specific things where I think companies are struggling to handle digital transformation. The first one is the metrics they use. The second one is their approach to human resources. And the third one is their culture. Let's take them one at a time. Metrics. There was a great study by my former company, Gartner, that was done where they asked CEOs of companies, how many of you are involved in some sort of digital transformation effort? And the number was like around 90+%. And they said, and how many of you are changing the business metrics you use to determine what success looks like accordingly? And that was in the single digits. And herein lies the problem. We are trying to put some new wine in the old wineskin. We have archaic measures that we're using. We're looking at backwards looking measures. We're looking at measures that are very quick to produce results. We've got to have it quarter by quarter, month by month. Whereas digital transformation is a longer game. Think about Amazon. When Amazon first came out and was a nobody organization and went public, Jeff Bezos said, hey, I can guarantee you I'm going to lose a lot of money for at least 5 years, maybe longer. But the few people that didn't laugh at that and bought those shares, well, they're laughing all the way to the bank now, because he realized that what was not important was profitability. What was important was market share, and that profitability would come. And boy, has it. In the meantime, Amazon's become a juggernaut at everything that they went after, nearly. So they had to invent new metrics, new measures, and new ways of looking at success. Most of our organizations are conservative and don't want to do that. We don't want to step back and say, how can we measure success differently? But you have to. Okay? Number two, human resources. Here's a problem with our HR organizations. And again, I'm not meaning to slight them all. I've been a part of HR organizations, but most HR organizations are built in order to mitigate risk, not to identify the risks that need to be taken. So as you're looking at talent as you're looking at development of people, you need to be thinking very differently. You need to be bringing in the right kind of talent. You need to be bringing in talent that won't have an ROI until the future. You need to be looking at how do you develop people cross-functionally and get them out of the silos that they're working in so they have much more malleability and can reorganize themselves. You need to be looking at how the organization is organized and who determines that. There are so many aspects of old human resources from an industrial era that just don't work anymore. I really believe human resources is at a bit of a crossroads right now. One road is where we go down the path of becoming vendor managers for all the vendors out there that are going to provide the bots, machine learning, the artificial intelligence, and all the things that will do most of the transactional work we did, and we're just managing those vendors. The other one is where we become much more strategic and we're helping our organization understand the kind of people and the mindset and the behaviors they're going to need to adapt and quickly change and adapt again and change and adapt again and transform in a digital world. Let's take a look at the third one, culture. Most of our organizational cultures are set. We like things the way they are. We like them to be stable. In fact, we'll sacrifice productivity over stability without even thinking about it. Cultures get deep into who we are, and they're driven by the myths and the legends and the stories of the past. They're incredibly hard to change. Oftentimes when we try and change them by saying, let's have a new campaign about what the new culture is. Here's our new beliefs. How many times in your life has somebody said to you, hey, here's some new things to believe that are different than what you believe. Take those and run with it. And you said, cool, I'm all changed now. It just doesn't happen. And so we're not working with our cultures the right way. We have cultures that are built around protecting ourselves. We have cultures that are built around staying in our swim lanes. We have cultures that are not built for the flexible, transformative world of digital transformation. And we have to address that. We have to address that at the individual level. We need to get individuals to try on some different behaviors and to step back and look and say, what worked and what didn't there? What might I learn from that? And what does that tell me about the things that I just believe and assume to be true that I'm not really cognizant of? That's the subject actually of a book that I'm writing right now, due out in the beginning of 2021 called The Heart of Transformation. I'm happy to talk to you more about when it comes around, but I wanted to give you kind of the heart of the transformation right now, which is you have to try some things differently and you have to learn from them at an individual level. When enough of that happens, things change and you get beliefs changing across the board, which change a culture. Let me give an example of an organization that addressed its culture. Now, I'm going to use a digital native here. This is Google, or broadly speaking, Alphabet companies, which is what Google sits under. What's interesting is even though Google was founded on innovation, they realized as they went forward that there were different parts of their innovation, right? There was Google, which now produces maps and search and the services you're used to, which now has settled kind of into a less of massive innovation and more of improvement and driving value and revenue and profitability from. Then you have Google Ventures, which is an organization where they invest in other technologies, most of them that won't become the next Google Maps, the next Google Search, but some of them might. And so they invest differently there to see what they can develop and incubate. And then, of course, there's X. Google X is where all the moonshots happen, where they do crazy things. They just think, what's the wild, crazy, out there thing that we could try, knowing that the vast majority of these ideas will not go anywhere, but one of them may be the breakthrough idea. What's interesting is when they created Alphabet, I believe one of the things they wanted to do was to separate some of those cultures, because the culture of Google now that was about improvement and yet profitability would not have worked with X, which was just about wild moonshots. There's a thread of innovation that goes through all of them, but they needed to separate them out a little bit to incubate those specific cultures. There are threads that run through them that are consistent across Alphabet, but they have distinct cultures, and they realized that one culture they had, the dominant one in Google, would not allow for some of the things that they needed. Is your organization willing to have those kind of schizophrenic cultures, to call them out, to build them differently, to find what links them together, and yet keep them separate? That may not be the thing you have to do, but you really need to think about what does your culture dictate and what does it not allow. Let's take a look at the third question now. The third question of digital transformation is what happens to the people who can't or won't go along with you on this transformation? I think there's two things to think about. The first one is you've got to give them a chance to not go along and to fight you. Yeah, you heard me right. You've got to give them a chance to not go along with it and to fight you. They have to have their time to doubt. They have to have their opportunity to question. They have to have a place where they can be skeptical and not just get a bunch of marketing. They have to ask the hard questions, and we have to answer them, even the ones that we say we don't know the answer. We have to give people that time to think it through, to come to the conclusion that it matters. Just like it mattered for us. If we're leaders in an organization, at first we didn't want to make any changes, and then we started to see the necessity of it. Everyone has to go through that journey, so we have to provide that place. We have to provide that forum where people can go through that journey. Me personally, I do that with a technology called HouseBase, and I work with HouseBase to engage in massive dialogue around what's changing and what's transforming and why. Not a one-way dialogue, but a dialogue at scale where people can really discuss and work through and come to those conclusions. And unfortunately, with what happens with those who can't or won't go along is some of them will need to leave. Now, some of them may be getting at the point where they're like, look, I've done what I want to do. I don't want to go through a massive change again. I'm ready. We might be moving them out, with an early retirement, moving them out gracefully and saying, that's great, move on with the next part of your life. There may be others that are going to self-select out and say, I want to go someplace where I can just do it the way I've always done it, the way that gave me the props and the credibility that I have. I don't want to start over. Because one of the problems we're going to find in digital transformation is when you start to realize that the culmination of your career and your learning is no longer quite enough for the world we now live in, there's only a couple of ways to look at that. One way is, well, if I'm not good enough now, am I a fraud? Should I not be here? Am I going to lose my position and the privileges and the status that I have? No, I'm not. That can't be the case. This whole thing must be nonsense. Or you might say, cool, I realize now that the world is changing quickly around me and the pace of complexity, it's just going up. I have to reinvent myself, but I was the right person to get here. I'm the right person to reinvent myself and continue to go forward and lead for this organization. Unfortunately, that latter way of thinking is a lot more challenging than the former way of thinking, and most people don't feel comfortable with it. They rather retreat to what's safe and what they know. So the fact of the matter is you're going to have to take a good look at the talent that you have, their capacity and capabilities for what we're doing now and for where you're going in your digital future, and you're going to have to make some hard decisions. Question number 4. Are your leaders doing what transformational leaders need to do? And I want to look at this 3 ways. Are they doing that as individuals? Are they ready as a team? And are they ready to believe? Let's take those one at a time. Now, whether you're a big fan or not of Elon and Tesla and the things that he's done, I can tell you one of the things that I love about his project to put a manned spacecraft on Mars. And yes, they have a project they're working on to do that. They want to do it within his lifetime. And it's not like a fancy. They're working on it. They're saying, we're committed to doing this within Elon's lifetime. And we have no idea how we're going to do it. And the technology and the science does not exist to do it. But they're willing to sign up for it, even though they don't know how to do it. Now, that's unusual. Most of our organizations, we only sign up for the things that we know we can make happen on our KPIs and get our bonus paid at the end of the year. We don't go for moonshots, or in this case, Mars shots. We go for what's safe. But as individuals, do we have people in leadership that are ready to sign up for things that they don't know how to accomplish? By the way, stepping back to HR, do we have an HR organization that won't punish them for doing that with the way they look at metrics and the way they reward metrics? Again, it's a whole new ballgame. No, you can't just spend tons of money and never make a profit. You have to work that through with your investors and what you're focusing on, what you're doing. But we do have to start to make some changes, and we have to have the opportunity for leaders to sign up for things they don't know how to deliver on. Otherwise, they'll only do what they know how to do now, and there is no transformation in that. Next one is, are they ready as a team? I love to refer to Pat Lencioni's work on this. You've probably read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I love how he asks the question, who's your first team? And most of the time leaders say, well, it's my direct reports that help me get things done. But really, your first team is your peers. And what's significant about that, actually there's many things, but one of the most significant things is, are we willing to sacrifice for each other Are we willing to give and maybe not meet our goal so you can meet your goal, because that's the one that right now serves the greater good and the greater goal of the organization? So you're not just focused on the finance goals. You're not just focused on the sales goals. You're not just focused on the manufacturing goals. You're focused on the larger goals of the company, and you're willing to make trade-offs between each other and discuss those trade-offs and hold each other accountable, is the word I'm looking for, and committed to those trade-offs and those things you need to make to achieve the larger goal. Ready as a team. Are your individual leaders ready as a team as well as individuals to take on things that they don't know how to do and do it together? And the third question under Are Your Leaders Ready is, are they ready to believe? Now, my poster child for this is the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. And when Satya came in, one of the things he did is he looked at sort of the monolithic products they had, like Office or Xbox, and he said, you know what? These are great and they're big money makers, but they're not the future. The future is in mobile and in cloud. And at the time, really what they had in mobile and in cloud was called Bing. I don't know how many of you Binged things today instead of Googling it, but I'm going to imagine the vast majority of you didn't. So saying that mobile and cloud, which for them meant Bing, was going to be the new thing in the future, just didn't make sense. But he started to show them how all of what they had to move into the cloud and had to be highly functional on mobile and be mobile. And he met with all of the leaders of the businesses to get them aligned to this vision of where Microsoft could go. And he was very clear. You need to align to that, or you need to do something else. Okay? He was willing to make those hard choices to get a team that believed they could take all the cash cows they had and turn them into something entirely different. Of course, in the end now, as we know, making Microsoft one of the greatest examples of a company, a digital company, reinventing itself and digitally transforming again into something amazing. What he's done with Microsoft is, I think, going to be the study of Harvard case reviews and business schools for a long time to come. But are you ready to believe? So those are the three questions for leaders. Are you ready as individuals, ready as a team, and ready to believe? Let's take a look at the fifth question, the one I think is actually the most important and the fundamental crux of all of this. Question number 5 is, are you personally ready, willing, and able to transform yourself? So I'm going to talk about a conversation, and then I'm going to talk about someone who I admire in this space. The conversation was with Clayton Christensen. Now, Clay passed away recently. We lost a giant in the field of thinking and of being just a wonderful human being in business as well. I had a great opportunity through a friend of mine to actually spend an afternoon with Clay a couple of years ago, just in dialogue. It was a great gift. And we were talking through some of the things we're talking through now. And at one point he stopped and he said, Michael, I'm having an epiphany here. It used to be that we had to develop the skills and capabilities to earn the job. Now we have the job and we have to build the skills and capabilities to earn the right to stay in it. And it was so profound in listening to it, but it made immediate sense. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we are at a place now where who we are and who we have been is no longer enough. The problems are too complex. The problems are changing too quickly. The technologies to solve and address them are changing too quickly. We can never know enough anymore. We have to be constantly learning. And so how do we embrace constantly learning? Well, I'm going to give you an example. And the picture you're seeing is Abby Johnson, who's the CEO at Fidelity, who I've mentioned earlier. So here's something interesting that she's done in the past few years. As she realized that distributed ledger or blockchain technology was likely to have a massive impact on financial services over time, she decided that she was going to become a thought leader in that space. Now, here's a couple of interesting things. She doesn't come from a technology background. That's not her strength. She really doesn't need to be more successful. She's a billionaire who runs an incredibly successful organization. So you take someone who is at the top of their game, already a CEO, already a billionaire, and say, why would you start messing about in stuff that you don't know anything about? And I think that's exactly why she did it. She wanted to show that you could embrace something that you didn't know anything about. You could embrace that ignorance and you could learn. I think that she wanted to make it obvious to her people that it's okay not to know. It's okay not to understand. It's just not okay to remain that way. You have to learn. You have to start over. You have to do new things to be able to move forward. So when we think about ourselves being ready, willing, and able, are we ready, willing, and able to change? Which means, are we ready, willing, and able to realize that who we are and how we do it is no longer enough? Because if we're not, we're just not going to change. So that's it. The 5 questions of digital transformation. What in the world does digital actually mean? Can your company handle digital transformation? What happens to people who can't or won't go digital? Are your leaders doing what transformational leaders have to do? And are you personally ready, willing, and able to change yourself? I'll leave you with this, especially that last one. Change is hard. So one of the things you need to do is inculcate people around you who are willing to tell you when you're being stubborn, when you're a part of the problem, when you're not changing, especially if you're in a leadership role. I had a great opportunity to spend some time and get to know Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, over the past few years. And we were in a small group with a bunch of C-suite executives, and they're asking him questions about the organization, the culture, what they've done with holacracy and all this stuff that seemed kind of out there. And one of those executives asked him, he said, okay, let's say I buy that your culture, your way of working, this, no management thing is the way it needs to be. How do I change my culture to be like yours? And Tony sat there, and Tony's a fairly quiet guy, and he looked down at the table for a minute, and he said, I don't know, that sounds really hard. And everybody paused for a minute and then started to laugh. But I think the point is he went on to say, is that, look, I didn't have to transform this culture. We built it this way. Now, there are some changes they've made, some evolution, but they built it that way. We're being asked to transform, which is a lot harder than building. You have to take the structure that's there, figure out how to take it apart and rebuild it without losing the essence of what it is and what it does. That's really, really difficult. So my message to you is transformation is really hard, and it's an ongoing process. It's a way of living, working, and being. But I believe if you ask these 5 questions of yourselves and each other over and over again, it will help you move through that transformation and truly become a transformative organization. Thanks for checking it out. I was glad to spend time with you. Let's have some Q&A now, shall we?